in any panic mode, in any outage, the first thing is people tend to get into a panic mode, right? So you really need to allow people not to get into the panic mode. So that is where the leadership comes into play. It's typically more directive, collaborative, that needs to work together. And also have to be very emphatic when it comes to vendors who are giving you services. They cannot slip up on it. You know?
Hi there. Just a quick note from your host. This particular episode of the Information Week podcast, we did run into, ironically, an episode talking about outages. We ran into some technical issues with the feed from one of the guests. Yeah, so you will see some edits, some stitching together where there were some losses of video and audio, but I think it all comes together nicely. So again, apologies for the technical issues, but we got to keep the show going. Thanks. Welcome back to the Information Week podcast. I'm Senior Editor Zhao Pierre Ruth, and today's episode we are discussing where do you turn during massive service outages? Many organizations rely on various third-party hyperscalers or service providers to maintain various online services and resources. And recently, there have been some outages of varying degrees that have struck, reminding us of how interconnected and vital these resources are, and how easily screens can go dark, or in some cases, go blue. So how tech leadership responds to such instances can make a difference to internal teams as well as the customer-facing operations. So what can you do when there's an outage, aside from waiting? To dissect and kind of take a look at what can be done and what organizations have, at least planned for this discussion, we are joined today by Sunil Peter, who is a CISO and Data Protection Officer for Maveric Systems. Sunil, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for welcoming.
And once again, we have good friend of the show, Pierre DeBois, CEO and founder of Zimana Analytics. Pierre, good to see you as always.
Good to be here. Glad to join this discussion.
Great. Okay. All right. Sunil, let's start off with you taking a look from your perspective of things. So how do you as a CISO respond to outages that could knock out some or all of online resources and capabilities? How do you, and even if there have been specific instances that you've had to directly deal with, how do you kind of like think about and prepare for what you might need to do for such situations?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because today, if you look at the way the landscape is geopolitically or, across the world, we are in a very unpredictable situation, right? You really can't predict what stability is. So one needs to be mentally prepared for unpredictable scenarios, right? You have logistic supply chain disruptions. You have undersea cables getting cut, thereby between continents, your communication goes down, right? But the irony of all this is we are still very interconnected. We are interdependent. I mean, there's no concept of, India alone can survive without connecting to the rest of the world. So to look at it very pragmatically, very holistically, we weigh in your spread, as it were, in the sense like, how is the organization structured? What are my core systems that are very, very critical for me to run my day-to-day operations? Because these systems drive, one, you have systems which are purely on revenue. You have systems which are to do with internal applications and processes to make your organization run, right? You have systems which interface with client systems, right? So when you look at the spread of all this, one of the very important things that we do in Maverick, which I normally do, is to do a very clear priority versus business, right? Business versus priority. What are critical systems? How much of effort and how much of investment do we need to do in order to ensure that they are 99.99% available at all times, right? So we do that prioritization matrix. And earlier we used to do that once in 6 months or once in a year. Today we do it every quarter, because you need to keep on revisiting your systems again and again. Because today, once I'm on the cloud and I have a hybrid solution, sometimes my cloud doesn't get patched, there's an outage, right? So I need to see how soon my today being in the banking sector, right? Cybersecurity is a big threat. State actors, non-state actors, we don't know from where the attacks happen, right? So if I were to completely build a full solution, completely on-prem, and forget about the cloud, right? And if I have a cable outage in the place where I work, my entire system just comes down, whereas the vulnerability is out there, right? So based on the size of our organization, based on the businesses, based on the kind of customers we interact, based on the criticality, we take very conscious decisions of how much of my security system is going to be hybrid, how much of it is going to be on-prem, how much of it is going to be completely cloud-driven, right? So all my critical systems today is a hybrid combination. So my core servers run in both locations. Yeah. While the reason we run it in both locations to ensure that if there is a outage, our outage is reduced to a minimum of 15 minutes or even less than that to quickly bring back the next system and start running. Because you can't have a disruption which has an impact on your numbers, because everything is numbers today. We also have strong compliance requirements that needs to be met. Getting thrown up, right? So one example I can very clearly say is our security incident and event monitoring system, which we use Securonics, is a world-class product in terms of my first line of defense for analyzing, correlating threats across my different indicators, my laptops, my networks, my servers, my cloud workloads, right? It does a lot of correlation, throws up these incidents, it flags it immediately, and then I get the alert from my team. The team does a quick understanding of what the issue is, and we quickly plug it in. So this is a hybrid system for me today. It's very, very hybrid. So I'm not worried of an outage. That's because we thought through a situation where tomorrow, if my cloud workload, for example, if I have my cloud workload sitting out of the US and there's an outage on the continent of US, then I'm going to get hit here, right? So we distribute our risks across different cities, different geographies, and the workloads sit in different locations so that we are able to cater to outages that way. So we distribute our risks. We don't put everything in one place and say that, single point of failure. So my point of failure is minimized by distributing it across. That's how we manage our own Active Directory. Many companies put the entire Active Directory on the cloud. In our organization, we do not follow that. We have a hybrid system. So if you're working within the organization, the Active Directory is completely within the system. You can work. The moment you go back home, you connect onto the cloud workload and keep continuing with your work. So as a CISO, one of my primary responsibilities is to understand the business, weigh the risks, prioritize what needs to be on cloud, what needs to be on-prem, put in those checks and measures and governance, and keep running the drill day in and day out. So every quarter we have trials. We have a business continuity plan trial, right? We do mock-ups. We do tabletop exercises. Sometimes we bring down an entire center to see how traffic can be routed through another center. So Maveric has got 3 big development centers in India. We have the biggest one in Chennai, in the southern part of India. We have another one in Bangalore, which is the Silicon Valley of India. And we have one in Pune, Maharashtra, which is the finance capital of India, right? So when we spread it across each of these locations, the way I've designed it is they are independent. So if Bangalore goes down, it's only Bangalore that gets caught. My Chennai still runs, my Pune linked our offices. While we have independent internet service providers, between offices we have interlinked. So in case Bangalore goes out of the internet, I can still route traffic from Bangalore through my Chennai gateway into the rest of the world. So those are some of the ways in which we have adopted technology, the way we have placed it inside our organization, and we keep rehearsing it. Practice makes man perfect. So we keep checking it and testing it and checking it and testing it. That's the only way we are able to stay on top of the game.
All right. So Pierre, now we'll come to your side, more of your side of the conversation, looking at the business and operational side of things. So your perspective, how do you deal with, situations with outages, not being able to update or directly online communicate with apps and what have you to clientele if there is a mass outage? I mean, sure, you might be able to grab a phone and do something on social media, but your direct line of communication, line of representing yourself to your customers, what do you do?
The biggest thing that you do is really try to look at what is the fastest way to communicate to your customers. And I think one of the things that in a crisis that for any business that people start to realize is that you cannot just assume that everyone is on all your platforms all the time. There may be a little bit of bias on one platform versus the other. Even for social issues, the one example I give is way back when they had the Charlottesville protest. You had I can't remember the name of the company, but they made the tiki torches. Mm-hmm. They went to Facebook and announced and shared with their clients that they were not affiliated with that event. And the reason why that was significant was that they knew that they had a larger social media presence on Facebook than they did on Twitter at that time, Instagram, or anything else. So you have to pay attention to which platforms people are responding to the most. Email is used sometimes as the safest way of getting things out because a lot of times people are looking in their mobile devices for email, and it's also a way of maybe setting a certain timing or certain, getting people's attention, like saying, hey, here's where we're going to have some information for you. But you can do that on any platform as well, too. But that's happened. I haven't been hit by outages for our business in general, but we've dealt with clients where for the analytics side, we've had to kind of make sure that from a measurement that there's some sort of documentation that says at this time there's been an outage, and at this time the outage was fixed, because that impacts a lot of things in terms of analysis downstream.
Gotcha. And what kind of messaging are you really trying to get across to that client-facing audience? Or to reassure them, to update them, and inform them. What are you trying to convey to them about when you're able to reconnect with them about what's going on when there's an outage?
The main thing that I think customers are looking for is things that impact their customer experience with you. That's the biggest thing. The fortunate thing about if you're doing analytics services is that you're a little bit more behind the scenes, but you still need to keep customer experience front and center, because that dictates which things that you're trying to address in terms of, not just in terms of analytics and metrics, but also in terms of outage. Give the customer a little bit of information of what's happening. Your next step is trying to tell them when do you think you can get a resolution, or what's the next steps towards that. And then your analysis for why it happened can come afterwards. And I think customers are aware that you as a company will need time to kind of assess what's going on. Sometimes it's great if you can have that answer when things are being restored, but as far as that doesn't always happen all the time. So you have to be ready of just kind of feeding some information to customers, and then also understanding where within the customer experience the outage is really playing some havoc. If you know that the outage is impacting your AI chatbot, for example, which could have been on Amazon servers, AWS servers, from what we have that outage a couple of weeks ago, that's a terrific example of knowing when your customer experiences are being impacted by the outage, and trying to say, hey, don't use our chatbot, but do give us a call if you need to talk to us about some particular information.
Gotcha. Yeah, taking that a bit further, whether it's chatbot or other things, are there types of services or resources that you might look to kind of further help the client as things are coming back, as things are getting restored? Are there training wheels or little things you can do from a technical side, or you can get from a technical resource to then extend to the client and be like, hey, this will help us all kind of get back in the flow of things? Anything you can do on that part?
That's a good question. And I think it depends on the client. Even better, like to have. I would say if it's if it's some sort, I think it depends on the customer a little bit. So, because sometimes your B2B customers are looking for certain corrections that might be different than what you would see from, say, a retail customer, for example. Mm-hmm. But I think given that, the thing that you want to think about is, what sort of solutions would help prevent maybe, say, a data leak, making sure that it's not something nefarious where customers' data is being exposed. Sometimes these type of crises may be a great way of introducing that solution. The one little asterisk I would add is that if it's something like a retail or something that's dealing with customers, like regular average, the average day customer, you want to be careful of not how can I put this? Not destroying maybe not adjusting the customer experience too much, where now there's a new learning curve. And if it is, that means that you need to be thinking about processes to teach that customer as well too, which may take a little longer to implement all of that, but it just means that you need to be aware of what solutions you're introducing. I think for B2B, or something a little bit more organization to organization, you have more flexibility. But for something that's customer facing, like, again, for retail or e-commerce, you may want to think a little bit more about making sure that solution is not totally altering the customer experience, because really that's almost altering your business model if you stop and think about it. So you want to try to kind of make sure that it's a measured solution as well.
Gotcha. Thinking of overall solutions for things, how soon should you start asking your service provider for detailed information on what happened when there's an outage, and how aggressive could or should those questions be? Granted, you might still be still their customer, and you might not have like a way to just say, okay, this service didn't work well for me, I want to look at like a competing provider. And it might not be that easy to then be like, okay, go with fire and brimstone to the provider, demanding answers, with kind of the half threatening to like, and I've got a foot out the door. So how soon do you want to kind of like get that information and really push for that information, and how, I guess, energetic should you be trying to get further answers from a provider?
That's a terrific question, because there's kind of two things that are going on. One is that I think sometimes we deal with companies that are partnered with another company to provide the service that we need. And sometimes that extra partner, it's not even just one, it may even be two. So the challenge becomes, how effective will the fire and brimstone really will be if you know that the customer, that your service provider is reliant on somebody else as well too, and it should raise questions a little bit as well. I think you definitely want to get to a point where you are operational. I think you have to push the accelerator and go after people a little bit. But I think long term, if it sounds like this is something that's repeating or that has a real long-term impact, you need to think strategically about, first of all, can you change something in the relationship? And that sometimes can happen. You might be able to alter something in the relationship to make things better. But I think the final straw is when you need to go to a different provider, because by that time, you've already decided that they are not, it's got to be something where they're not responding with any real solution or anything or something that streamlines things for you. And right now, I think people are just thinking in terms of what can streamline the operations for our business, basically. And that's what everyone should be protecting for.
Gotcha. All right. Speaking of streamlining businesses and operations, it is that time to streamline our thoughts, because the game screen is out. The Ninja Turtle screen is out. It is time for Questionable Ideas Are Us. Okay. All right. So for those of you the first time with the Information Week podcast, now's the time for Questionable Ideas Are Us, the fictional company where our tabletop exercise unfolds. This is the part of the podcast where our guests tackle fictional scenarios inspired by today's topic. So, Sunil, Pierre, let's see how you do contending with today's IT shenanigans I've come up with. For those of you who are watching and listening, scenarios were not shared in advance with the panel, and the panelists are not responsible for the hobgoblins and kobolds that appear. It's entirely my fault, and there will be other guests and things that are going to be coming up, including gremlins in future episodes. Okay. All right, so Pierre, Sunil, again, approach this that you have been brought in as interim executives to Questionable Ideas Are Us, with your same roles, with the same kind of authority and power that you have in the role that you have, but you're brought in to help this company, and this is where you're operating. So, okay, you ready?
Yep. Ready.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Here's the first scenario. All right. Suddenly, the website and customer-facing app for questionable ideas are us crash. Soon after, your third-party CRM also disconnects. While the IT team scrambles, more cloud-based software and services go dark. It's soon clear there is a major outage affecting external resources that the company relies on. The hashtag hobgoblins suggest switching to temporary host resources to at least restore some online functionality. This could mean relying on services from smaller local providers, but there are also some other concerns. The hosting capacity of these local providers is much smaller than that of the primary provider that the company's been using. You will still not be able to have access to all of your assets that you would from your main provider. Furthermore, the local provider's security is notoriously not as robust as your primary providers. The board of directors wants the company back online in short order, but your security team strongly recommends waiting until the primary provider can sort out the chaos. How do you proceed knowing that customers and your board are watching the clock?
Right. It's quite an interesting take on it. Right. I hope I'm audible. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So literally the DR head or the CISO is really stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea.
Well, that's you in this situation.
Yes, so I'm right stuck there. So you have a management which wants to see the systems up. You have customers who are barking down the line to ensure that they don't want to see their services getting disrupted, right? Ideally, I would probably take a few steps back. Now, since you're already in the situation, probably you'll take 2 steps back. Number one, you will first look at your risks and pros and cons of moving to a smaller player to restore at least 25 to 30% of services, right? You may not be able to restore everything, but at least the critical services that you need to do. So you would gather in the team of experts who are there. So you get your security guy in, you get your server guy up, you get your network guy in, you get your application guys up. Explain to them the situation, right? And give them some time to start thinking of how to move their services from the big player to the small player. Okay, of the critical services that is needed. You need to be the fungible person in between the management, the customer, and your team. At no point in time are we allowed to leave the pressure down into the team because they cannot perform. So you should be able to absorb the heat, the pressure from them. Walk back to the management and tell them the actual story. Fact-based reporting is what is essential. I'm sure some of them will understand, some of them will definitely not understand. Okay, there could be various issues at hand, right? Somebody wants to grind an axe on you, they might use that opportunity to do it, by all means. But we are there, so we are in the kitchen, we need to learn to take the heat or stay out of it, right? The role calls you for handling those pressure situations. Go to the customer, empathize with him, understand his problems. You lay out the fact as to what it is. Explain to him that this is a situation beyond your control. And you need to take in the big service provider along with you to explain what exactly has gone wrong. So you not only back up your information by yourself, but you need to get good evidence from the big player to state that this is exactly what has gone wrong. You're not the only customer or the organization that is suffering. There's a whole plethora of companies which are also in the same soup. So there is commitment that you have from your team to move some services to a smaller player. You also have commitment from the big vendor whom you've used as a hosting service provider, who's also part of that game. He has to have a skin in the game. So you need to tie him into this whole thing and then get into a collaborative conversation with your stakeholders, both the internal as well as your external, with your customers, and give the team the much needed relief so that they can focus on moving the services from the big player, some critical applications, so that they come online and do it. And you need to probably give a periodic update every hour or every 2 hours. Keep the communication channels going, keep talking to them, and ensure that the team has the required time to go ahead and get the work done.
Yeah. I want to jump in on this. I agree with Sunil on this. I would say definitely triage. The biggest thing you want to do when it comes to business is you need to kind of divide things into two areas. Something strategic that might be a little bit long term, and then the things that are immediate that your customers feel that you really kind of need to kind of get corrected quickly, so that way they continue to be customers, right? So Sunil brought up a really good point about managing people's expectations, and I think part of being that point person is kind of drawing the line on what's really strategic and what's tactical. Even if that's a list that you're making for yourself, I think that's something you have to learn how to do and be familiar with the different departments and different technologies being involved. Doing that can help make it a little less overwhelming, because I think it's easy to sound that it's overwhelmed, but you need something that allows you to take that strategy and take the tactics and kind of put them in their own list. So that way you kind of can know what to match the people downstream with, and then what to match the people upstream with. And usually you even find that tactical tends to go to your downstream team and your strategic goes to your upstream team. So definitely I think that's something you have to keep in mind to get this addressed.
See, one of the things that which I believe will work, is the person who makes the maximum noise in the management needs to be part of the triage. So he actually gets to feel what is the heat on the ground. He understands the magnitude of the problem rather than him being just a receptor of the communication, right? He's involved. He may not be a decision maker. He may not be able to understand everything, but he's part and parcel of that issue. So there's a greater sense of collaboration that needs to be built in. In any panic mode, in any outage, the first thing is people tend to get into a panic mode, right? So you really need to allow people not to get into the panic mode. So that is where the leadership comes into play. It's typically more directive, collaborative, that needs to work together. And also have to be very emphatic when it comes to vendors who are giving you services. They cannot slip up on it. We need to be very, very directive with them, point blank, so that they understand that we are serious and we cannot afford to have any further slip-ups. So you need to be able to punch hard, soft at the same time, right? You carry a big glove with a firm fist. So when the punch falls, it falls at the right place and they get the message. So it's a lot of soft skills that's involved, a lot of technical understanding of what the situation is on the ground. And you need to be able to marry both of this to convey to the stakeholders that this is the ground reality and how we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
Well, one element of all this that doesn't care about triage are the hobgoblins, as we'll see in the next scenario. Okay, scenario 2. And well done with dealing with the first one. All right. Moving on to the next scene. All right. Primary services are coming back online from what has been dubbed the crocodile crash, the name based on the shape of the outage impact on the geographical map for what was impacted geographically. Unbeknownst to everyone in the company, the hashtag hobgoblins proceeded with their own plan to get some online operations going with resources they cobbled together. Asking for forgiveness rather than permission, as they do. They even managed to conduct a marginal amount of business across a system that they do not completely understand that they put together. At least you were active while your rivals were down during this outage. Though the hobgoblins are patting themselves on the back, there are issues to resolve because of this. For one thing, the transactions they conducted in the interim need to be reconciled with the company's existing platforms and software. The sales team thinks the hobgoblins were lifesavers with their janky fix for the situation and want to continue to use their fix at least as a backup in the future. However, security chimes in, panicked that the hobgoblins exposed sensitive data in the process. And the security team needs time for a proper forensic cybersecurity assessment. Do you let the sales team and the hobgoblins have their way using this cobbled together system as a backup in the future, or do you lock things down and make time for a further forensic assessment?
I think I'll say for me, I'll give this a shot. I'm not really happy about the cobbled up platform. I tend to be biased against that entirely. And a lot of that is a little bit of an analytics bias more than anything else. But I think part of the reasoning behind it is that it's long term, it just does not sustain very well. And you can start building up technical debt very quickly now. Much more so than what we've had in the times past. It used to be maybe like 10 years ago, you can kind of, technical debt exist, but it wouldn't necessarily grow. But I think now it can scale much faster to where it really can be a hindrance to make a correction. And I think that I don't think that you have an option of allowing a system that lets data leaks exist. There's also a branding issue as well too, right? Everyone, I think customers expect a data leak these days, but the even higher expectation is that you're doing everything possible to prevent that. That's kind of like what a legal definition is that you have taken proper steps to prevent a data leak from happening. And because of the existence of GDPR, of data privacy laws that are, United States, we don't have a state one, but we definitely have we don't have a federal one, but we definitely have one by state. The expectation has already been established that you as a company has to take proper steps almost each and every time that you're coming out the bat. So I would say I tend to lean to more, getting something more readily in place rather than the cobbled up version.
So Joe, I tend to agree a lot with what Pierre said. One of the fundamental things that we need to do, especially when we have a situation like that, is to go back and look at the MSA or the contract that we have with the client. And definitely in that contract, we should have a very clear section on saying, in the event of an outage, this is exactly the procedures, and the policies that we'll adopt, right? You have that as one piece. Then you have, definitely you have heroes. A lot of heroes will jump in at that last minute, trying to hobble it up together and try to get a brownie point here, a brownie point there. But again, that's like
brownies.
Yeah. So that's like trying to build, a big strong house with just a bunch of straws, and all that these guys get is only a bunch of straws. And these quick wins are basically the quickest way to get yourself killed again, because you already got beaten once. You don't repeat the mistake again. Because the system which has gone outaged is a very well-established system, and you're trying to piece together some pieces of code from here and put up some few functionalities just to keep the sales guys happy. It's not going to solve your problem. You're only going to elongate the problem rather than addressing the core of the issue. So keep that aside. You have your contract, engage with the right stakeholders, explain to them what the problem is, talk to the vendors and the service providers that they need to pull the shoes up and get the buckles up and start working. The other important aspect is you have governance, right? You have laws, you have state laws. In India, we have CERT, which is a cyber unit of the government of India. We work with banks across the world, right? So they are also concerned because it's primarily to report back if there's a data leak. And you cannot afford to have a data leak in any of these segments. Right? Because there's a lot of PIIs of customers sitting in there. There's a lot of corporate information. There's a lot of banking information which is sitting there. So you cannot have a data. So it's rather to be err on the side of caution than to just get excited and hobble up a few systems and then get it going. I think we should never do that. That would be very unfair on the person who's actually bringing back the system back to its original state of optimal use. And instead of that, diverting all your attention to a hobble up. Because the moment they begin to see some small piece of work happening, everybody will be focusing their resources and attention there.
Great. All right, gentlemen. All right, so we're on to the last scenario. Okay, if you're ready. So the dust has mostly settled from the outage and the recovery, with many visible issues addressed by internal teams and the primary service provider. When you return to the boardroom to debrief, the kobolds are already there. They ask that you take a seat, and then they proceed to list additional issues that they found from the outage, including continued exposures the security team has yet to uncover. The kobolds believe not only are the hobgoblins to blame for their hasty actions, but the service provider has unresolved issues that have not been addressed from the outage. The kobolds lay out options that the board would hate. They want you to either the kobolds are suggesting that you break the contract with the service provider and potentially sue them for the outage. Kobolds also say it is time to a multi-provider model to ensure redundancies going forward. But they also want more resources hosted back on-prem rather than just being out in the cloud with third parties. The cost would be exorbitant, but the kobolds claim that they can convince the board to agree to this thanks to a stash of embarrassing childhood photos and memes that they've collected about the board just for a situation like this. Do you let the kobolds lead you down the path of lawsuits and blackmail, or do you explore other options?
I want to be quick. I want to explore other options. So in sum, it's to explore some other options. Sunil?
Yeah. This is, once the dust settles down, everybody will try to keep passing the buck, to kick the can as far as possible, not to take the blame. But I think this is where true leadership shines. Out of crisis comes the real character of the person who leads. So I think one of the things which I believe personally we must be doing is we should have a very honest, open conversation. Keep all our biases, our views, everything out, and say that this is not my problem or it's not your problem. It's our problem together. The decision to do certain things are taken collectively. While one person might be accountable to execute it, but the decision comes down from the board, right? They give you the budgets, they give you the approvals, they nominate people to do it. And it's all reviewed upstream. They do quarterly review, they do half-yearly, annual review. Everything is there. But an outage has happened. You can prepare for everything in life, but sometimes it does break, right? So an honest evaluation needs to be done. Reprioritization of what is critical to be on-prem versus what needs to be done on the cloud, on the hybrid, has to be very clearly thought through. The technical, you need to redistribute your risk. Maybe you put all your eggs into one basket, or put 80% of your eggs in one basket and the remaining 20 in another. So you probably need to look at new players, new service providers who have better technology, who have better robust processes of resilience. We need to also talk to our peers in the industry to see how they have also redistributed their risks. Because it's not only our problem. There are many people who've learned ahead of us. So we could always tap into their wisdom to see how we can restructure the way we need to operate in this climate. And if as a business is spread across different countries or different states, it's better to have certain critical systems decentralized so it operates with different resources in multiple places, so that in case one location goes down, you can still tap into another location and still continue working, rather than put all your key resources in one location. So there are a host of different techniques that one can apply. And the most important thing is not to forget why we failed, what led us to that failure, so that you take those lessons and then introspect, retrospect, and then go ahead and start putting those learnings into practice so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, right? If you repeat the same mistakes, then there's no point in the learning session. So what lessons we have learned, both from management, from the board, technical, team, skills, technology, the vendor, the kind of commitments, the contracts, security vulnerabilities, all of these lessons need to be very clearly documented, and do it strategically over a period of 6 to a year. It depends on the magnitude of the problem you face. Low-hanging fruits first, then mid-term fruits second, then your long-term goals. Break that up into progressive baby steps, step by step, and keep achieving the target. And I'm sure we'll be able to do it. Because if I were to relate this to India, right, we live in a country where you really don't know what goes off when. But if you look at it dynamically, the way we have built resilience into the system is we don't look at business continuity, we look at business resilience. How well am I able to serve my customers better, faster, efficient, secure? So when you have your business objectives built into your disaster management and outage management systems, it becomes a way of life for you. You don't need to break your head on, okay, what's going to happen in case it goes down. You've already factored that in your design. You already factored that in your communication. You already factored that in your contracts. You already factored that in your execution style, right? It's already there. And you need to rehearse that with some drills periodically to keep the whole system running. That's more preventive by nature. So I think in today's world with so much of unpredictability, I think we need to move towards a preventive methodology, reduce the risk exposure rather than always go back and say, oh, it happened, and then go back and fix it again and again. It doesn't help. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, the Kobolds are disappointed that they're not allowed to use blackmail to get their way. They just want to get everything onto them. That would solve everything.
Yeah.
They know that's your weakness and they'll always walk over you over it. Never do that.
Just blackmail, just doing everything old school. Listen, gentlemen, Pierre, Sunil, you've toughed it through some technical hiccups on this particular episode. I thank you for your resilience. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sunil.
Thanks, Pierre. Thanks for connecting. Good. Have a nice day.